Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. I want to give you an overview today of a government-funded programme in the UK called the Home Access Programme, which has been specifically designed to address the digital divide in the UK. Now, as Joe just said, I work for an organisation called Bett, and Bett is the UK government agency responsible for all things to do with educational technology, particularly in schools. And the kind of work that we do is getting involved in policy and advice for schools around such things as how could you use technology more effectively? Thank you. How can you use technology more effectively to engage parents, to embed it across the curriculum so that young people have the skills that they need to make good use of technology? How can we use technology better in training teachers? And we also work with industry to come up with content technical standards and procurement frameworks to bridge that gap between industry and schools and allow schools to make purchasing decisions more effectively. So to give you a bit of background about schools in the UK, well, they're very diverse and sometimes fiercely independent, which means that any government policy which is being implemented from the top down is sometimes quite a hard sell. There's been a tremendous amount of investment in technology in schools. We have most of our schools now with broadband access, with use of interactive whiteboards, and most with learning platforms. But the situation at home, we found, is not quite so widespread. Certainly amongst the higher income brackets in the UK, there is high levels of internet access at home. But there is a significant divide between the high income and the low income, which I think is pretty much the case the world over. And this was a particular concern as more and more research has come out to show the importance of having internet access at home. We know that in the UK that having a computer at home equates to quite a considerable advantage when it comes to educational assessment at 16. And also it helps in engaging parents in their young person's learning. And in the UK, that is the number one factor which influences how well somebody does at school. There was also a really good economic case for addressing this problem. We know that obviously if grades increase, then job opportunities improve, and that's good for the UK economy. But there's also the benefit to the whole family. So parents themselves can develop their own skills, have better chances of getting jobs and improving their salaries. And there are savings to the UK government too. The more people that are online, the more the government can take services and put them online with significant savings. So, for example, applying for a passport or accessing information about the national health system, that can all be done online. And economic modelling showed that for every pound that we invested in a programme to help people get online, there would be more than £5 back to the UK economy. So with that in mind, it was 2 years ago that the then Prime Minister of the UK made an announcement of £300 million to provide free internet access and computers to low-income families. Now, obviously, the intention of this was to narrow the attainment gap, but it was also to help schools starting to extend their schooling outside of the school building and beyond the school day, which is something that we're recognising as increasingly important. The programme was also designed to help those people with special needs, so we wanted an inclusive programme that particularly addressed those that found it difficult to access the internet at home. It was also intended to help parents get involved in their child's learning, for example, allowing schools to give reports on the students' progress via the internet to parents at home, and also to start extending that benefit to the families in terms of social, economic and educational benefits. So we started off with a number of guiding principles. We decided it was most sense to target those lowest income families in the UK. We also wanted to get schools involved. We wanted them to understand what the benefits could possibly be, but we didn't want to provide them with any kind of burden, so they were not involved in the administration of the programme. The package that we negotiated of the free internet access and computers, we also felt was very good value for somebody to buy. So we made this available to anybody in the UK with a child at school that could buy the computer and internet access and get all the benefits that went along with the programme if they weren't eligible to have it for free. And also we made sure that the computers were safe, they had parental controls on them, that they had educationally approved software, and were inclusive of those children with special needs. Probably the most innovative thing about the Home Access Programme is that it was consumer driven. Now, in the past, the government has given free equipment to low-income families before on a much smaller scale, and these have not been very successful. And research has shown that one of the reasons is that if a government physically gives a computer to a family, there are all sorts of problems associated with this. First of all, if they've bulk bought a number of computers, they soon get out of date very quickly. There's also no retail competition, so they tend to be quite expensive. And from the family's point of view, it meant that they're getting a handout, and that does not really give them any incentive to use that computer effectively. So we needed a sense of ownership. We needed parents to go through the same retail process that anyone would who was going out to buy a computer, to give them choice and give them ownership. And we also wanted to make the programme fast and efficient, and we managed to match retailers in that sense as well. And we promised under 10 days from application to computer, and we managed to exceed that. So this is how it basically worked. We had a marketing campaign which was targeted to the low-income bracket, and we worked with partners, particularly some charitable organisations, and targeted those low-income families so they would receive a phone number that they could then call a dedicated call centre for. And during this phone call, they would have a few simple questions to ask them about their eligibility. They would then receive an application form, which we're very proud of because it's won a number of awards for being very simple to fill out, because there's nothing like a complicated application form to put you off. And after getting that, they would receive a credit card in the post. Now, this is very innovative. This was a preloaded Barclays card, who we partnered with, which had encrypted details on, which meant that the parents could only use that card in an approved retailer on approved equipment. So we worked with several suppliers to make sure that their staff were trained, that the computers were suitable for educational use. And as part of the package that they could purchase with this card, they received a year's internet access, a computer, a year's support, and a package of software. And it doesn't stop there, because giving equipment in itself is good, but it doesn't really fill the whole need. So we followed up with information for those families on how they could access training. We used a homepage which was preloaded on the home access computers to feed information to those families about some of the things that they could benefit from by being online. Anything from cheap shopping online to accessing government services to getting free courses to help those families that were unemployed manage to find jobs. So we're now at the stage where the money has all been spent. The investment of £300 million has now finished, and we have managed to help over 250,000 families in the UK get online for the first time. Now, there is an ongoing evaluation that's being done independently, which is still happening, but we've got some very positive indications. We know that the Home Access Programme has had a significant effect on the digital divide in the UK, that the use of computers at home, we know that on average, pupils are using that computer for 6 hours a week to follow up their schoolwork. We also know that parents are improving their own skills, and one of the signs that families really value this internet connection is that once the year has finished, almost all of them are choosing to continue internet access at their own expense, so they're reprioritising to be able to do that. And all research indicates that teachers, parents and the pupils themselves are all saying that it's had a positive effect on the learners' skills, their participation in class and their confidence. So we're now at a stage where the Home Access Programme has finished, but there is a legacy that's been left. We now have a collaboration between government and industry and the charitable sector, which has not happened before this. Retailers are also recognising that there is a real need for an educational package that parents who don't have many skills in terms of understanding how to buy a computer or what they should be buying, to go out and get an out-of-the-box solution that's approved for education. And we're seeing quite a change in some of the retailers in the UK of how they're targeting this market. We also know that some of the innovations, such as the Barclay card, will be particularly useful for other government programmes. We've seen parents become more aware that technology at home is of educational benefit. And we've also worked with schools who are realising that if they have most of their pupils online at home, they can utilise their learning platforms more effectively, they can communicate with those parents, and they can extend the school day and make homework more exciting. But it's been a fantastic programme to be involved in, and some of the best things have been the stories that we've got back on a weekly basis from people who call Bett and say thank you. This has made a real difference to us. I've heard from disabled children who have managed to communicate for the first time using technology, from pupils who were not very confident who are now raising their hands in class, and from parents themselves who have developed skills and become employed for the first time. So if you would like any further information about the Home Access Programme or about any of the work of Bett, please do contact me. That's my email address, and I will be around after this session if any of you would like further information. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrea. As Joe said, I'll be moderating. My name's Triska Hamid, and I cover the IT and telecoms pages at Mead. But my role is more akin to timekeeper today, as the real expertise lies with the panel. So I ask each member to introduce themselves, a bit about their company and their positioning statement.
I'm Stefan, working for HP as Education Manager in the region.
Okay.
My name is Richard Marrett. I run Wiz Education. We specialise in raising standards in maths through online one-to-one tutoring, whole class teaching resources, but most importantly applied with best practices. We work with schools and parents in a number of different countries. So we experience some of the digital divide that we're discussing today.
My name is Elise Dadson. I am an ICT partnership teacher. I work for CFBT, that's the Centre for British Teachers. I have experience in industry and also as a teacher in the UK and recently in the UAE. As an educator, I think I have a really privileged and very vital role to play in narrowing the digital divide, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later.
My name is Ketla Ndlovu. I'm a strategic advisor to the Vice Chancellor at Tshwane University of Technology. Formerly Director of Higher Education Management Support. And so I do believe that ICT has a role to play. However, from my perspective in terms of being a developing country, South Africa, the extent to which governments play an important role in ensuring that the infrastructure and support is actually there.
Thank you. So let's just begin with your understanding of the term digital divide when applied to the divides within countries and between countries in the Middle East. Who'd like to answer? Stefan?
No, I've talked.
I'll start.
Okay.
I think digital divide varies from country to country. And I think what's interesting is what's included in that definition. So I think we often think of computer access, internet access being a really critical one. But I think it's more than, and of course, content and digital resources that make a difference to end learners. But I think it's also what I've seen has made a significant difference, depending on where you go, is actually the know-how of teachers, so their confidence in it. But in particular, that's guided very much by attitude. So I think attitude to the digital impact on education actually makes a profound difference to the digital divide, even where the hardware and software is in place.
And how far are the divides between the countries in the Middle East, so you've experienced?
I think in the Middle East what you see is, if you compare it to, say, the UK or to a lesser extent the US, is you see a very wide variety in the digital provisions between schools at the top end of the market and those at the bottom end. Whereas in the UK, where there's been a huge amount of expenditure in ICT over the last, I would say, 10, 15 years, Andre, would you say? It's very much the case that schools that from impoverished areas often have better ICT provisions. I don't think that's the case from what we've seen in the Middle East. You see the top-end schools having provisions just as good as a good school in the UK, and at the other end of the extreme, it's a long, long way away.
And is the disparity, does it happen within the country specifically, or have you noticed it varies from country to country, say from Yemen to Saudi Arabia? How big are the divides?
I have to say our experience extends in Jordan and the UAE predominantly, and I think those two countries are, as I understand it, more advanced than several others in the Middle East. Surprisingly, I would say actually Jordan is, certainly we've seen the schools we've worked with, what's the word I'm looking for? The teacher's attitude and confidence in using technology, if anything, is slightly ahead in our experience, which surprised me initially. I think that's partly, I don't know if you guys saw the presentation earlier by the Jordanian ministries. They've had such a very clear vision and united approach to making an improvement there, and I think that's already had a intangible impact that you can sense when you're there.
Okay, thank you. And with regards to sort of uptake of these new technologies, how willing various Middle Eastern countries, and is that helping to narrow the digital divide at all between them? Do you have experience of that?
Yes, I mean, my experience as a teacher in the UAE, advising and working alongside local teachers, is that, yes, there is good progress. I mean, the program I'm working on, which is the Abu Dhabi Education Council, is making great strides in working with local partners to improve teaching and learning skills, and that certainly will help with bridging the divide. And certainly the idea of the digital divide as being mainly due to hardware between the haves and have-nots has got to move on to bring it into the classroom and making accessible to everyone. Good teaching using skilled educators, excellent practitioners, and also making sure that it's not just access to the hardware, but it is about what they use their access for. So internet access. I know, according to the International Telecoms Union, in the UAE, there's 75% of the population have access to the internet. But what are they doing with it? What are they using it for? And that's where I think the divide lies. And certainly, as a practitioner in the classroom, I look forward to bridging and narrowing that divide by making sure that there's excellent teaching and learning going on.
So the divide you talk about is within the UAE with a good level of internet penetration, as opposed to the way the internet is used. But there's also a digital divide between the countries in terms of infrastructure and the level of penetration. 75% is a fantastic level, whereas in Egypt, it's only 20%, according to the ITU. So how can that be addressed?
I mean, the UAE is not typical of obviously neighbouring countries. You're quite right to say that. They've got quite a lot of financial backing, and so they can make sure that the hardware is there, and they definitely can put a lot of backing behind what they're doing. But in other countries, I think the way you bridge that divide is definitely targeting it in the classroom, making sure that the teachers, whenever they have the chance, can. So making sure that teachers have the best skills to bring those skills to the young people. At the end of the day, you want the young people to be able to compete on the world stage with people like-minded, of similar age, and they only can do that by getting the good education. You can have as much hardware as you want, but if they don't know how to use it and how to apply it, we do live in an internet age now. It is about having the skills, the know-how to be a savvy internet user, to make sure you're economically viable for the future, and that's what we need here.
Okay, thank you. But with regards to... Go ahead.
A point about South Africa. She's saying that we need to move on in terms of physical access. But a country like South Africa, for instance, that might be a first steps that we need to take, because currently, if you look at if you look at the computers per 100 person, South Africa is just below 25. Namibia is better off than South Africa. But when it comes to issues of access to the internet, for instance, high speed, reliable, we're probably the better off the countries around, in and around SADC, in the sense that the investments that the country is making for what you call the west and east coast submarine connectivity, and those countries will depend more on South Africa as such. But also putting that infrastructure in place creates problems in the sense that have high speed, but is it high speed internally within the country? And therefore you need additional resources to be able to do so. And pressure has been mounting on the government to be able to ensure that that happens. But of course, with the World Cup, we've been able to ensure that that infrastructure is in place, which we're building on some of the things that as a result of certain activities that are helping the country move forward.
Okay, so to clarify, your point is it's better for governments to invest in the critical infrastructure before deploying any sort of systems in schools. Yeah. Is that something you all agree with?
I think for what I see here, when the digital divide, one is, of course, you have to have the infrastructure and that whole in place. But I think also here in the Middle East, we have somewhere also a cultural background, what we have to respect, that internet access is not always seen as, wow, this is the solution, this is really what we want. And I think there is a lot of work to do also from their side, like you were saying also, it's the kids educating a little bit the parents, and that's how you get further. Here that is also true, but I think there is a little bit of heavier cultural luggage on the environment in order to make it happen. And like you're saying, okay, the 75%, what population is this? Is that all the expats we have? And what about the people in Ras Al Khaimah, in Al Quwain, and all these regions? Is it really also the 75%? How they see this? Do they see this as something we want to have, or I don't want to have it? So I think that is. We were talking about Saudi Arabia before. Okay, I think that it's a whole other ball game. Jordan, very open country.
I agree that there's a lot of presumptions made when you use the term digital divide, that it is simply a matter of people not being able to afford a computer as opposed to those that can. But the situation is often a lot more complex, and it varies tremendously from one country to the next. I mean, certainly in a lot of European countries, it's to do with attitude, to do with realizing the benefits that the internet can offer. It's to do with education, it's to do with culture. And I think identifying why there's a digital divide is probably the first step that any country needs to take.
I think the other thing we've seen over here is what you were saying about attitudes and culture, is that we've seen possibly a bit more resistance to parental involvement here than we have, say, for example, in the UK. But I think going on to your point that you mentioned about having infrastructure in place, I think when children have access to the internet and educational resources, whether at school and ideally at home as well, the advantage of that is that we don't necessarily have to rely entirely on the evolution of teachers, because just in our own experience we see, when I'm on a computer, I'm afraid I might make a mistake. When a child's on a computer, he's almost hoping to find the mistakes. You know what I mean? They've got an exploratory attitude. And I think that's particularly prevalent with the young children, which we work with primarily primary and early secondary sector students. And if you can give them access, their curious and inquisitive mind can actually be a big driver that actually drives the teachers to develop their own knowledge and confidence. So I think investment in infrastructure so that access in schools and beyond is actually very powerful.
So, in your opinion, which do you think is the more constraining of the divides, a cultural divide, or is it the physical digital divide?
I would say the easy thing to solve is the infrastructure. That's the easy part. The other part is you cannot force it, you cannot drive it, or it takes huge publicity campaigns or long-term thing. But changing the mentality of people, what that thing can do, can a boy talk to a girl? Is that allowed? Is that not allowed? How do you make sure that parents feel comfortable with that? That is not something where you can, with 300 million or pounds, you get nowhere if you don't have a basis. So I would say the culture is quite important. The infrastructure will follow, and there is, at least here in many parts of the region, there is money enough to solve that. That is not always the issue.
Do you think the culture is to be sorted and the infrastructure will follow, or the other way around?
It goes somewhere together, but if the culture is not there and people are not willing to use it, then you can have a high-speed computer, whatever, in every room, and it's not going to be used because people will push it away. We have seen it in the region. There are hundred thousands of devices laying in schools, paid by all kinds of government organizations in Iraq, in all the places what are not used. It's not because they're not there, they're there, but people don't want to use it.
I think I agree with you, because the one thing that we have to think about it, if you look at a school, for instance, a school, I classify them into three categories. Your high-level users, your moderate users, and your low-level users. The reason for that is that the high-level users would be your young generation, IT-savvy kinds of teachers, and therefore with them, it's easy to actually use the technology. But the majority of teachers or educators are actually the low end, in the sense that they're old and also sort of afraid of technology. The point you're making that an adult would be afraid that it's going to break. But a child, you want to see whether it's going to break or not. And if it does, why? So the type of teachers we need to be producing are teachers that are technology, ICT oriented, in the sense that they are able to utilize your e-learning tools that we have, and the extent to which that translates into the kids that are coming out of school, that they have access and they can use it. And that way we can bridge the divide. But if we are focused on trying to make sure that everybody, the old and the young, we might not necessarily achieve that. So we need to have a place where we're focusing to say, how do we build the future that is ICT oriented and have that kind of access. And therefore the infrastructure becomes important. Okay. We are using it at the moment, we're getting more people, but the infrastructure is not supportive. And so how much resources do we really need to put in to actually build that?
Elise, you wanted to make a point?
I just wanted to add that in bridging the divide, we do need, I agree with you that there are some cultural barriers there, but I want to stress that there are a number of socioeconomic groups, and it really calls for looking at all the groups across the UAE region. And you talk about expatriates possibly making up a huge number of that statistic I quoted. I also want to say that there are groups in the UAE who have the money to buy the access to the technology, but I would like to say perhaps they don't have the know-how, and so they could be brought on board quite easily, and perhaps the culture is not a barrier to them. It could be that. I mean, you could also have parents whose children are coming home with more and more challenging work, and they might want to know to be able to support their children. So it is really looking at the different groupings that make up the whole UAE. We've got local Emiratis, we've got expatriates, we've got migrant workers, and each of them will have a certain degree of knowledge level, skill, and it is really tapping into that group and seeing what can we do to bridge that divide. And certainly as a teacher and an advisor, I think that's where you start making those changes in the classroom.
We've been focusing quite a bit on the UAE, but the Middle East is quite a vast region. Egypt has, after China, the world's most active internet users. So it seems as though the cultural divide doesn't really exist in Egypt. The only thing that's constraining them is the lack of infrastructure. So, which, in terms of progression, which states in the Middle East are, progressing the most? Do you think? If you'd like to.
I would say Jordan is definitely on top. I think they're very active. They've done a lot of work a long time ago. They started with the GEI, Jordan Education Initiative, sponsored by the WEF. I think like 5-6 years ago, a long time ago. They did an excellent job. It's an easy country. It's small. It's a couple of 6-7 million people, something like that. I'm not sure.
Small definitely has an advantage. I think one of the advantages that Middle East countries have is that they have the opportunity to learn from some of the initiatives that are being taken in the UK, which, from my travels, I would say is one of the more advanced countries in terms of ICT in classrooms and schools. And I think UK being very vast, one of the interesting points you made, Andrea, is that schools in the UK are fiercely independent, and you can't... one of the themes of ICT in British schools was every school was left to make their own decisions when it came to digital content or anything like that. And I think for smaller countries, that would potentially be, depending on how it's handled, an error, because it turned teachers into software buyers and hardware buyers, something they were completely unqualified for, and something well, that's the wrong word, not completely, certainly didn't have the time for. And I think at the same time, you've got to balance that with the other point you made, is that if something's shoved upon you, you don't take any ownership. I think countries in the Middle East have the opportunity of combining central guidance, purchasing, with combining a mechanism to create ownership. And I think that would have a significant impact in the Middle East in terms of gradually narrowing the digital divide and making a genuine impact in terms of raising standards.
Andrea, thank you. Andrea, you mentioned that for every £1 invested in the programme, £5 returned to the UK economy. Is this a likely figure that we can apply to the Middle East at all, or will it vary by state?
I think to compete in a global marketplace now, I think countries are recognising more and more that they need to have those skills to be competitive. So certainly I think there would be benefit to the economy. Whether that number varies, I think, is something that each individual country needs to have a look at. Is it going to impact the kind of skills that each particular country needs to develop and wants to? So it may not be the same from country to country. I think it needs to be looked at.
I think here that is also to go once again to a previous question. Like Jordan has definitely, that's their policy. They don't have oil, they don't have gas, they don't have raw materials, they don't have anything. The only thing they have is people. So what they want to do is making sure that the people are highly qualified, that they can export them. Same with Egypt. Egypt is, I think, also, they have tourism, gas and things, but also they have 80 million people. They want to become a knowledge hub, developers hub for the world, like India was before or still is. And that is definitely one of the drivers behind these programs, I think. Here in the UAE, Saudi is perhaps they have all the other alternatives to their economy than people.
So the current digital divides that do exist, if they're not addressed, is that going to impact the competitiveness of the Middle East in the future?
I would say for certain smaller countries, yes, who don't rely on oil. Okay. Like Jordan, like Lebanon to a certain extent, perhaps Yemen. Not these big Kuwait, I don't think so. They have oil.
I think within countries, actually, the oncoming of ICT in education actually has the risk of increasing the economic divide within a country. Those students, those groups who have access, who have the confidence, who have the attitude to exploit it, will actually be at the forefront of innovation going forward and accelerating. And those who don't have access I think the gap will potentially increase. So I think it's a major risk that must be taken very seriously.
Elise, I wanted to ask you, how effectively are the educators managing the divides between socioeconomic groups?
In my experience, what works well is a bit like what Andrea said, approaching parents, working with parents, because you need to get them on board to see how important that is. We can do as much as we can in the classroom, in schools, but we must partner with parents for them to see. Also, making the most of the opportunities we have in the school day. In an earlier debate today, someone talked about the structure of the day and how difficult it is in the UAE because of the timings to make use of the extra time at the end of the day. But I think making the most of the day and using things like clubs and schools to bridge the divide, so pupils who don't have access to the technology at home can take advantage and go into a Scratch club or whatever club that's available to bridge the gap. But certainly we need to partner with parents to make them see they need, for their own children's future security and economic viability, to help them bridge the gap.
And with regards to training the educators, how large a role does that play in narrowing the digital divide?
I think it plays a massive role. Probably the biggest barrier within schools to teaching digital literacy skills, to getting children excited about using technology, is the individual teacher attitude, and having government policy and having a teacher training in place and providing mechanisms to allow the sharing of good practice, not only within countries but between countries as well, I think is vital.
Just to point out, one of the things that our government has done in South Africa is that a new initiative called Teacher Laptop Initiative, in a sense that in order for teachers to be able to assist children or learners, they themselves need to be equipped with the tools to be able to do so. And therefore, as part of the initiative, each teacher can have access to a laptop with all the necessary software. But what we need to be looking at as a next step is the extent to which we use learning technologies or e-learning tools that would have relevance for both the teacher and the learner. Because that way, then you are likely to improve on student or learner attainment. Because that's the target that these technologies need to help us to be able to achieve.
Okay, thank you.
But I think also we have seen here in several countries, and we were involved in these, that if we try to equip schools, and because of the time schedule, what is quite early, and then it stops around 2, 3 o'clock, that then we're trying that equipment is used for educating parents, that these schools become somewhere community centers where some students can help their parents and then bring mom on board and dad on board in order to make better use of that equipment, what is there anyway laying around.
Earlier on in the day, we were hearing about the Jordanian case study, and I thought their knowledge centres was a really good idea, where they provide these centres in the community almost for free, we were told, and they could have access to the internet, or access online learning libraries, and I think that's probably another way forward.
But with specific regard to the gap in socio-economic groups in society, if you close the digital divide, the digital gap, will it have a direct impact on the gap between socioeconomic groups? And what is the best approach to do this, to tackle this problem?
I think if you look at all the vital ingredients for a successful educational experience, getting parents involved, having access to knowledge and information, having an environment for lifelong learning, collaboration, all of these things can be supported by technology. And therefore, not having that technology is a significant disadvantage. So yes, I do believe that if we tackle the digital divide, we'll have a significant effect on the attainment gap, but I don't think it will close it. I think there are other factors as well. It just seems that those without access to technology are disproportionately represented in those that have other issues which are preventing them from successful education as well. So I think it's important to tackle, but it's important to bear in mind that there are other issues as well.
Okay. And what more can educators do to address these problems?
Well, you see, it's a trick question. I'm saying it's a trick question because educators by themselves cannot. They need the support from parents, from authorities, and so on. So that's the important aspect. That's why I said earlier on, the focus in terms of my thinking is how governments respond in terms of assisting schools to be able to really provide for access, both in terms of physical infrastructure, but also in terms of how our learners become used to the technology itself.
Okay. Do we have a question? Or...
I thought we're running a little over time, and the group have been listening very patiently. I wondered if there were any questions from the floor before we hear any closing remarks from the panel. Perhaps we are at the end of what's been a rather long day. This gentleman here has a question.
Yeah, my name is Sal Rihani with ICDL GCC. It's a certification, it's a standards company that's an arm of ECDL, which is the European Computer Driving License. So digital divide is our work. But what I heard from everyone here is there are many solutions to the digital divide, but what is the process moving forward? Because there are different needs, such as in South Africa or in Egypt, where infrastructure is lagging, versus potentially in parts of the Middle East, it could be more a culture barrier. So I still don't see a step moving forward. There are a lot of issues, especially in this region. It's unlike maybe where in the US, although geographically very large, culture is pretty much the same. In the Middle East, that's not so. There are differences between each country. So my question to you again, sorry it's a bit long-winded, but what is the step moving forward? How do you see it progressing?
I would say a first step, and it would just be a first step, is to learn from each other. I think every country that is recognising this as a problem is addressing this in slightly different ways, and there does need to be more opportunity for sharing that and collaborating. But bearing in mind that each individual country is going to have their own reasons behind the digital divide, as we mentioned, which may need to be tackled individually. So I think this kind of event is the first step, that we're sharing good practice and sharing those stories and starting to find what might work in different cultures.
I think we have seen...
The other thing that probably we might think of is that we're here, for instance, and a lot of technology which is new, some of it is an upgrade and so on. What I found is that when technology comes out and we want to use it, even before we learn to use it, there's new technology. And what that does is it either makes us lag behind more, or alternatively, we're discouraged because now I have to learn something new. And I haven't even learned the old one. So the extent to which we always have kind of pauses in terms of allowing. If you look at schools, for instance, you give them something today and you come back the following day and say, well, that technology is no longer useful, now there's new technology. They look at you like, well, we haven't even started with this one. So somewhere, somehow, I'm sort of pleading for that kind of wavelength introduction of new technology so that at least we can be able to use the old ones, because once we know it, transitioning to the new technology is much easier as such.
Yeah, I so agree that the most important thing we can teach young people nowadays is to deal with change. There is nothing more important than that, and that does, certainly in the UK, that does mean looking at the curriculum and re-evaluating it and taking it away from knowledge curriculum to one which is the problem-solving skills that allow people to deal with the change that they'll face when they're older.
Stefan, did you want to say?
I think the first step, I think we have seen a lot of first steps here. I think your organization is one of the first steps in infrastructure. People are investing, or governments are investing is another first step. There are a lot of things happening, I think also like for ADEC, with our Educational Council, they're working on first steps. So I think there is a parallel process going on, and you cannot really leave one behind. And it's Middle East, it's 10 or 11 countries, they're all very diverse, so it's little by little, step by step, and it won't happen tomorrow. So.
All right, it's another question.
Okay, thank you. My name is Moeketsi. I'm from South Africa. I just wanted to find out from the panel as to whether does gender play a role in terms of digital divide? If it does, how better can be narrowed in terms of the gender, and which part of the society really it's lacking or is not showing that really they are for these particular gadgets? Thanks.
I think, I don't know if I can answer that question in full, but I think one interesting aspect about the gender aspect is that there's been a great deal of research that if you educate a girl in any particular skill sets, like using ICT, or that it carries through to the next generation. So you actually you teach future generations in the process, you empower future generations. Whereas for some reason you teach a boy and he uses it to further himself. It's obviously a massive rash generalization. There's been quite a lot of research on this with micro-lending and stuff like that in Bangladesh in particular. So I think that's something for us to be aware of if we're going to direct anything with towards one gender or another.
We found in the UK that it is not so much the time that differs between genders in terms of how they're using ICT, it's what they do with it that is different. So boys are more likely to play games, girls are more likely to socialise. So it's kind of reflecting the personality stereotypes for the different genders rather than saying that one gender uses technology more than the other. That's not the case. It's what they do with it that seems to change.
Okay. Any more questions, Joe?
Yes, just one quick. At our university, we have students with laptops walking around and so on, but all of them are men. And when you look at that, you start thinking, the question you're asking as to why is that, and what is it that we can do to change that? Is it because of their cluelessness towards use of technology? And if so, how do we find ways in which we can encourage also female students to really, really see value in these things?
Okay. I think we are out of time. Okay, all right. Okay.
So I'm sure you will join me in thanking our panellists and also our moderator in the usual way. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention during this last session in what's been a long but I hope productive afternoon. Looking forward to seeing all of you, or most of you I hope, tomorrow for the second day of our event. Thank you for joining us, and we shall see you again very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.